Live. Hi,
Love it.
everybody, and welcome to Data Dialogues, hosted by Analytics8. This is a web series that we do on LinkedIn Live where we have a discussion on a relevant trend or topic in the data analytics industry. If you're interested in learning more beyond this session, I strongly encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We cover quite a lot in our newsletter in terms of relevant trends and topics in the data analytics ecosystem. It's a great resource if you're looking to learn more. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Kevin Lobo. I'm Vice President of Consulting here at Analytics8, and I lead the entirety of our consulting team. With me today, I have Josh Johnston. Josh is a principal on my team. Josh has extensive experience in constructing and leading data teams. He's served as a head of data for several of our enterprise clients, which is especially relevant because today we're going to be talking about the topic of building and leading data teams. Josh and I are going to be talking about general strategies that you should keep in mind when you're building your data team, and also focus on what actually makes a strong head of data, particularly given Josh's expertise functioning within that role. So with that, we're going to dive into the conversation. We're going to start with a focus on the concept of building data teams. So every single data team is going to have particular needs in terms of skill sets, roles required, budgetary constraints on the headcount organizations can even afford. So there's quite a lot to think about. So Josh, we're going to start with a bit of a softball question.
Love it.
So for someone assuming a head of data role, what's the day one thing or things that they should be looking at?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, and thank you for the introduction as well. It's a great question, and you know it's funny. We call this a softball question, but it's not easy, right? The concept of like that day one, or as I put my thoughts around it, it kind of starts to feel like a week one time frame. But imagine your beginnings of your journey as kind of like a combo of an assessment and also trying to get like that current state understanding type of time period for you, right? So the first thing is just trying to understand that current landscape. So right, that means familiarizing yourself with the existing data infrastructures and systems and processes in place today within your team that you're coming a part of. You also want to review any ongoing data projects and initiatives in flight to get a better understanding of what's been committed to, right? You also want to set aside some time just to meet with the team, right? So this just means scheduling introductory meetings with your team members, taking a moment to let them know more about you, as well as letting them do the same, right? Creating that level of that dynamic and familiarity is going to be important for that longevity. And an important objective with that as well is you want to understand their roles and responsibilities from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
That'll actually provide you a baseline of knowledge to understand where they're at in case you need to make any sort of changes or shifts in roles, or even if you want to create like a new delineation of responsibilities amongst your team. You can't actually make those changes successfully if you don't know those roles and responsibilities as they sit today. You also
Yeah,
want to spend time. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
no, it just kind of spurred something where I think that's a really important point, especially when you're talking about understanding the current state landscape, because I think one of the I wouldn't necessarily call it a flaw, but one of the things that I tend to see is if somebody's coming in to make a wide-ranging impact, like that's their mandate as a head of data. I've definitely seen situations where they haven't necessarily taken the time to assess structurally how things have played out over the course of the last 10 years within the organization. In-flight projects, things that kind of serve as dependencies, and the big mandate, the big idea that they have doesn't take into account for that. And it almost always stalls the project immediately out of the gate. So I think that's just something that kind of popped up that I've recently seen in a couple of examples.
100%. And right, like how, I mean, think about the concept, right? Like how are you ever able to make a change if you don't know where you're at today? Because it's like trying to reach for something and not knowing where you're reaching kind of thing. So like it's the idea of you have to understand what's going on currently. So 100%, absolutely. But you also want to like set aside some time to meet with stakeholders, right? So connecting with key stakeholders across the various departments and understanding what their needs are, what their data needs are, what their challenges are in terms of data today. They also give you an opportunity to identify what those key business priorities are and how data might possibly support those, right? And then you want to evaluate as well, like data governance and policies and quality integrity, right? This is kind of the idea of understanding, like doing a little assessment and figuring out what the quality looks like, if there's good processes in place, if you've identified data accuracy issues, completeness, consistencies, and just trying to
Mhm.
figure out what that trust of data is, right? Trust, and you're going to hear me mention trust a lot, but the idea of like trustworthiness is important because the more people trust data, the more that they adopt. And the more they adopt, the more value you and your team bring to the ecosystem of your organization. So you need to understand how much people trust today. And if it's high, that's awesome. And if it's low, then you need to figure out like, well, why is it low? Is it just them not being able to have purview into the work being done? Is it communication? Is it truly like inconsistencies in the data? So like there's an aspect there where you really need to tackle and understand where trustworthiness lies and how to improve that.
Yeah, and I
And
think
oh,
one,
go ahead.
I think 1.2, and then I want to shift to the next question because we're going deep, man.
You're good.
I think understanding as a day one priority the consumption method of data for your business users downstream. I think it's super important, right? How are they actually accessing data? If there's a reporting infrastructure that's in place, are they accessing it and basically pulling it into Excel, or are they actually using the solutions that are in place? It's a huge point of understanding basically how your business users within that ecosystem are actually engaging, interacting, using, consuming data. As it's going to definitely help kind of point you towards a strategy that you want to implement as part of the day one directive. So
100%. And like if you don't tackle everything, that's okay. But as long as you keep all these things we're talking about in mind, then you're headed down the right direction, right?
yeah. So I wanted to shift gears and kind of talk about roles and responsibilities. So they roles and responsibilities obviously play a pretty critical role overall in the composition of data teams. Again, each organization is going to have differing needs based upon their tech stack, but also based upon where they're at now in terms of their organizational maturity and where they plan to go. So how do data leaders balance building their teams when they're accounting for the short-term view versus something like looking at the longer-term direction of where they eventually want to go?
Yeah, that is a tough one. And there's a few things you have to do to try to strike that comfortable balance. One is just like you have to begin by having clearly defined short and long-term goals, right? So this means, knowing what actual work has to happen in the short term. What use cases and projects have to be actively tackled in the now and today to show impact and value. The reality is that you'll never grow into whatever you hope to become if you can't execute and succeed in what's put in front of you presently. I actually had a mentor back in the day who told me, Josh, stop worrying about the size of the team and stop worrying about the money in the budget right now. Instead, worry about conquering what's in front of you and in front of your team right now. Because if you do that, you'll knock it out of the park, and then people will see that you knocked it out of the park, and more money and budget will come to your team because more people will want to experience the value that you and your team brought to that particular domain or specialization or project that you had. So set up for success in the short term is pivotal, right? And along with that is knowing what that long-term vision is for both you as a data department as well as the entirety of the organization, right? So where are you trying to go? What capabilities do you need to have in order to get there? What growth do you hope to achieve, and what roles do you need to exist to be able to achieve those? So setting short and long-term goals, pivotal. But on top of that, you also want to, like on a second front, it's just making sure that you create a versatile team, right? So this means building a team with diverse skills that can contribute to both the short and long-term goals that you've set. This also means investing in your people and making sure to allocate budget to ongoing skill development to keep the team versatile and up to speed to the technologies in the ecosystem today. We know, you and I know very
Yeah.
diligently that technology evolves in a
Pretty
hyper speed,
significantly. Yeah.
right? So us as people, we need to invest in people to be able to keep up with that hyper evolution of technology. So I'll stop there. Those are probably the two biggest pillars there, right? But if you follow those, then you're preparing for the now, but you're also preparing for the future, and that's kind of the best way to strike that balance here, Kevin.
Okay. So kind of pull down, if I were to summarize, pull down the quick wins, get what needs to be done in front of you to ensure buy-in, ensure that level of competency is felt throughout the organization. And then for the longer term strategic initiatives, effectively be selective and start slowly growing out, building your team, implementing other components of the stack that you want to implement. Is that kind of at least a halfway decent summarization?
100%, Kevin. And I would highlight, the reason why I said versatility in my comments is the reality here, especially if you're in like an area of growth in the beginnings, right? If you're kind of
Yeah.
in that the beginnings of your journey of growing your team, the more versatile you can have you and your team members be, then that actually increases growth and success just because there's so much to do. So you need versatility so that people can kind of wear multiple hats at first. So you kind of want to start with the versatility. And then if you start
Okay.
becoming a very large team, then having those kind of specialized SMEs really helps out in the long term.
Okay. So that's actually a good segue into the next question that I had. So what are some of the best or I guess most optimal methods that you've seen in terms of team composition or structure, or what are just some general patterns or themes that you've seen in terms of building data teams, more from like a tactical level, since we're kind of on that topic of versatility versus specialized roles?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's so many compositions and models out there to consider, right? There's centralized, decentralized, federated, hub and spoke, matrix. That's not even covering all. So there's so much to choose. So the big question I hear a lot from clients that I work with is which one is the right one, right?
Yeah.
What are we supposed to be doing? And I get it. It is hard, but the reality here is there is no right one. There's models
Yeah.
that we've seen that work more often than not, but the reality is you have to evaluate where your company's at and make a decision that's best specifically for you and your company, right? Now, the list of considerations are actually pretty clear, right? We have kind of three things, at least that I consider when I work with clients to try to evaluate where we should land. One is just having to consider your organizational size and complexity, right? So this means,
Mhm.
like larger organizations tend to lean into like hybrid structures, and smaller organizations actually kind of tend to lean into like centralized models because it's easier to pull off when you're small.
Yeah.
Second thing is like considering culture and collaboration. So, like, how does your current organization handle collaboration? Would they do well with a decentralized model where you have to communicate a lot and
Yeah.
often and very well? You know what I mean? Like, kind of thinking about your people. That's huge, right? And that's same thing with like the cultural aspect is, how would your people behave and react to the idea of like this there being like this central team or like a federated team that's trying to focus on departmental goals in conjunction with kind of the overarching enterprise goals that are set. And I think the third pillar that actually isn't considered a lot is technology and tools. This isn't as common, but certain tools actually support more federated models more so than others, right? So like think, for instance, if your tool, in your ecosystem that you have today, if the tool has supporting like data mesh, like architectural capabilities, then it can be more decentralized because the tool can help collaborate in a decentralized model
Mhm.
where business domains have stronger ownership over a particular data set. So there's a lot to consider, honestly. And I know I'm also time checking myself to make sure here. There's a lot to consider, but as you evaluate your ecosystem of your company, as you get answers to those questions, it'll steer you towards the various organizational models. And going back to your original question, Kevin, I will say the most success and investment
Mhm.
that we've seen with organizations is in kind of like that hybrid like model Because the idea here with the hybrid model, or like even like hub and spoke is considered a hybrid like model.
Yeah.
It's designed to give you benefits of both worlds, and it has its own caveats and pitfalls as well, right? If you think about actually kind of talking through it, if you think about the way you visualize hub and spoke, there is a big central circle, right? And then
Mhm.
you have your dotted lines, and then you have your spokes. And a lot of times when people invest in this model, they think, okay, I'm going to hire for my central team. I'm going to
Mhm.
hire for my spokes, right? I'll hire embedded analysts, and those will be the spokes of the departments. And then, I'm done. Wash my hands. We nailed it, right? And that
Yeah.
actually could be farther from the truth, right? If you think about the way we visually draw hub and spoke, there's that circle, there's the lines, and then there's the spokes. And what people miss is actually those lines, those lines from the hub to the spokes. That's not just pretty pictures. That actually represents something, right? Like those
Yeah.
lines represent collaboration. It represents cadences, meetings, policies, processes, even like shared code repos, right? Like
Mhm.
the idea here, and even just like consistencies in what you create. The idea is those lines in a hub and spoke model mean that you're establishing collaboration between the hub and the spoke. And if you don't have that, then you're basically going down like a decentralized model that does come with its own kind of plethora of issues, because then your spokes kind of become silos, and your silos will just kind of do independent work that doesn't correlate to other work, or it might create like duplication across your other spokes. So there's a lot of challenges there if you fall into that pitfall of not creating, sorry, those cadences and policies and processes that you need to create a true hybrid like hub and spoke kind of model. So
Yeah, and,
um,
and I think that's a really important point in the sense that reporting structure and work structure, dotted lines, solid lines into teams, while all well and good, they are a representation of activities that need to take place, clear and concise communication, especially in a hub and spoke, where people are clear and set on expectations, development standards. All of that still requires lift. Kind of implementing an org chart without having those actions defined doesn't necessarily bear the best results from what I've seen. Um,
100%.
so I wanted to shift gears here because building a data team is only part of the equation. There's also the equally important aspect of leading that data team. So I lead a pretty sizable team at Analytics8. You've led pretty sizable teams in your experience functioning as a head of data. So I wanted to focus on the aspect of leadership and how to approach leading data teams specifically. So head of data, VP of data, whatever you want to call it, those roles are unique in that you're leading a team, but you're also leading a technical domain. So there's almost a necessary mixture of soft leadership and hard technical skills that are going to be key to be successful in that role. So what do you view as the necessary pillars for an individual to have in order to succeed in a head of data, VP of data oriented role?
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Kevin, right? This is when we think about data, or even in like the IT space, like those are unique spaces, because it is the idea of, you need to be technical, technically capable. But you have to be able as well to socialize those
Yeah,
technical things that are happening to people who don't that aren't as
understand.
technical as you.
Yeah,
So there's a
yeah,
translation capability there. So yeah, thinking about the idea of pillars, right? Like, so one of them would be, just the idea of like you do have to have high technical proficiency, right? That's required. You lead a team of technical professionals, so you have to be able to match them in conversations and be able to appropriately give them, the mentorship, leadership, and guidance required in order to succeed. And you also have to be able to have that technical understanding of those pieces of the solution, so that you're then able to take that information and then translate it into something consumable for your stakeholders to understand, because you have to be able
yeah.
to socialize that value proposition, right? Um, I think another pillar is like just advanced leadership and management skills, right? So the being able to lead and even inspire a collection of people while also communicating like a clear strategic direction for a department is imperative to long-term success. You have to be prepared to being the one to make those big decisions and those big calls that keep steering the ship, no matter how hard it might be. Um,
Yeah.
there's also a pillar of like business acumen, and this kind of boils back down to like when we talk about translating information. So
Mhm.
basically, the ability to to hear a business problem or need that you're having with a stakeholder, and then piecing together how like data is involved in that
Yeah.
process, right? Sometimes you'll have stakeholders that, they just it's hard to understand where data intertwines with a need or intertwines with a problem or a process or a day-to-day operation. So that really falls onto data leaders to be able to provide that support and knowledge to have that kind of dynamic in a conversation. And as you connect with stakeholders, you also need to be able to manage their needs as well as the needs of other departments on top
Yeah.
of, like a holistic need, right? You usually have departmental priorities, and then you'll have kind of like strategic enterprise priorities, and you'll have to play the understanding of how these interact with each other and
Yeah.
even correlate, right? So that's
Yeah.
huge,
I,
very huge.
I think for me, you kind of touched upon it. For me, I think one of the I don't even know if you define it as a pillar. I don't know how you kind of want to characterize it, but it's basically the ability to see interdependencies
Yes.
in a lot of the major initiatives that you're pushing, right? There are a lot of great ideas. There are a lot of effective things that heads of data or VPs of data want to effectuate within their organization, but understanding the interdependencies, things like I want to build this great report that measures gross margin for all of my products. If data source availability is an issue, if capacity from your people is an issue, if stakeholder availability is an issue, all those are dependencies that are going to have material impact on the timeline for what you want to deliver. So the strong candidates, the people who effectively lead in those roles, typically I've seen them as a characteristic or trait. They just have a high degree of acumen and understanding. If this dependency isn't met upstream, how is it going to translate downstream in terms of how quickly I can turn around solutions for the broader organization? How quickly can I make an impact for the broader organization? People who have a very good handle on being able to read dependencies and tasks, those tend to be the most successful that I've seen. There's nothing qualitative per se,
Yeah.
or excuse me, quantitative per se behind
Quantitative.
it,
Yeah.
but it's a characteristic trait that I tend to see, especially in strong heads of data or VPs of data, just understanding kind of the sequence and flow of one thing doesn't come to fruition upstream, where am I going to be at 3 weeks from now downstream? Um, so
100%. Yeah.
I want to jump to the next question. So I've seen a pretty wide spectrum of folks kind of subsisting and operating in a head of data role. Some of them tend to be very focused on the intensive technical details, almost in the weeds. Others tend to rise above the tactical day-to-day almost too much. So what's your view on the level of involvement that a head of data should have? How much autonomy do you think that they should be giving their teams? What do you think is kind of the optimal balance?
It's it's a great question, and I will echo your comment that I have seen the same, right? This is always kind of an interesting topic because everyone kind of does it a little different, and
Yeah.
this answer kind of fluctuates. But the answer here, or the honest truth here is, the answer changes just based off of both the maturity and size of your team, right? So the idea here is, if you're in, I'll call it like the infancy of growing your team, right? If you're at
Mhm.
the beginnings there, and then of course you're going to have to be heavily involved in that tactical day to day because there just isn't enough muscle in the team to do
Yeah.
all the necessary work, right? That happens. That's more common than you might think. So, whereas once you have a larger substantiated team, you should feel comfortable having that step back and letting your team do the job that you hired them to do, right?
Yeah.
Giving autonomy. I love that you bring up autonomy, because giving autonomy to people is incredibly critical. And you can quote me on this, Kevin, but at no point in anyone's career did they say they loved being micromanaged. You don't hear
Yeah.
that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that people just don't say that. And there's for a good reason, right? Autonomy cultivates a space of growth, learning, and it gives leadership opportunities for your team, right? Think about it. Once you start substantiating your team to 20, 30, 40 plus, right? Like once you start getting large, you as a VP of data, head of data, what have you, once you're in that kind of, I'll say echelon or what have you, you will have other leaders in your space with you reporting into you. So you want to enable people to take on that leadership activity. So as a data leader, it is your job to set direction, define strategy, and provide the support your people need to succeed, and then just let them do their job. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
I'll even say, I had, I've done this in the past. I had an analogy that kind of try to visualize what I think about, especially when we start getting to a larger team where you're leading 30 people, right? As a
Yeah.
data leader, it's a bowling analogy, so just follow with me here. What we say is like as a data leader, what you want us to do is like show your team the path, right? Where you're trying to achieve. That would be like the bowling lane. And then show them what the objective is, right? In bowling, that would be just knocking down these pins in front of you. And then say, this is what we need to do to succeed. And then you just let your team roll with it, bowling pun
Mhm.
intended. And then from there, you might have to put up maybe some like bumper rails, right? Every now and then, just to make sure your team stays that course, that strategic direction that you've set. But together, you'll roll down the lane, you'll knock down pins, and you'll succeed in your objective. And I'm actually a fan of this analogy. First off, it's easy to follow, but it helps articulate and visualize kind of the idea of like you as the leader don't always have to be the one taking and rolling
Yeah.
the ball and knocking down the pins by yourself. It's this idea of setting the path and making your objective and what you're trying to achieve as a team very clear and providing that
Mhm.
guidance, and then letting your team together, you and the team, tackle those objectives and succeed and win as a team, which, collectively, that also creates like this success that permeates throughout the department, your data department, which just creates that higher morality rate for morale for your team. So it's good. It's a good way of thinking about it.
You you can add bowling analogies to the list of skills that you have right there. I
Easy,
like
man. Yeah.
that. So yeah, it's actually kind of a good segue into the next question that I have, because you were talking about morale, building the success for your data team. Because one of the most difficult aspects that I see in operating as a head of data is that you're not only ultimately responsible for driving the development and delivery of data solutions within an organization, it's also getting the broader organization on board with using and adopting those data solutions, championing their success, getting the broader work of your data team and the importance and the value that they're driving out there to the company. So what are some suggestions or tips that you have for data leaders in doing that and kind of making the success of the solutions that they're building for business users accessible, apparent? What are some tips and advice that you have there?
It's a great question, and it is a challenge that everyone runs into, right? This has happened everywhere I've gone in my career. This is something that we are always striving for, or trying to achieve, or challenged to tackle. So there are things you can do, right? So like for starters, you can and you want to ensure that the work you're doing is aligned to business goals and objectives, right? And the reality around that is you're wanting to make sure that your work is tackling something that is prevalent and important.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, that means you're tackling like a high priority or something that'll provide high value. And on top of that, you need to communicate that value that we're talking about, right? So clearly articulating how the project can benefit the organization. You should be socializing this wide. and show what is it impacting, and specifically like the clear metrics that it's going to hit, and like how is it going to move the needle of the business. That goes a far way. Value messaging, huge. You also want to create like a constant engagement, right? So like this is the idea of like bringing stakeholders along the journey from beginning to end. So right, that way they feel invested and are a part of the creation of whatever asset you're generating, right? That goes a long way as well, because as people feel attached and a part of a product, then they want to use the product because they know more about it. It's more, I'll say, like curated to their needs or desires or whatever their problems are. Usually these are tied to problems that people are having. So it's a great way of like bringing that engagement. You can also provide education, right? Ensuring that the organization actually understands, what you've made, how you made it, and how to use it. I'll say sometimes just the lack of understanding how to properly use or consume something eventually reduces the amount of adoption. So we can fix that just by creating a little bit more education and literacy around the
Yeah.
work that we're making. And I'd say lastly is like building trust. And we've already talked about trust once or twice earlier, but I'm going to keep bringing that up. That's something that, we see often, right? It's the idea of, showing and ensuring that what you've made and what you're showing them is of quality work through, your quality assurance activities, your policies, your
Mhm.
internal test and UAT sessions that you're bringing the stakeholders and business on, and procedural processes, all to prove that the asset that you're providing them is good and trustworthy of use, right? If you get that trust, people will want to adopt. So follow those suggestions. The more you do those, the more you'll see the onboarding of people and the adoption of the solutions you provide.
Yeah, and I guess from my vantage point, I have a mentor who kind of explained it to me as you always have to have the why behind it. You always have to be prepared to explain the why behind it, the solutions that you're effectuating, things that you're building, and have that easily accessible and understood by the organization. So that's always something that I think I try to keep top of mind in leading teams wherever possible. I see that as being kind of a strong thing to lean on. So we're almost at time. Final question for the day. What do you think defines a successful head of data versus someone who's going to be less than successful in the role?
Yeah, I mean, just like talking broadly, right? So like someone who's successful, what you'll see is, there's someone who, can inspire others, motivate a data team to achieve great things, foster a culture of collaboration, no matter what organizational model you go about, you have to have that culture of collaboration, or anything will falter. Being able to provide the mentorship and guidance to others to help them grow and their space and role, having clear strategic vision, that's a huge one. People need to know what they're trying to achieve and what direction you're trying to push them towards. Mitigating risks where applicable. As a leader, you should be the one overseeing your team to try to find what those risks might be, and being having the foresight to know what you might need to tackle just to accelerate that. And then just having like strong overall communicative capabilities to articulate clear and concise value that your team provides. That will all kind of collectively drive more success. And if you lack any of those, that's okay. You've actually done the first step, right? If you feel like you're weak in any of those things I just said, the first step is identifying, and the next step is trying to go about different actions or activities, or just trying to refine yourself as an individual to be better at some of those aspects we're talking about. That'll drive you farther and level you up in your career.
Well, with that, that's all the content that we have for today. I hope everybody out there who joined today, is going to watch a recording, found this useful and engaging. If you do have any questions after this, feel free to connect with Josh and I on LinkedIn. Check out some of our existing blog content that we have out there on how to build effective data teams. And please sign up for our newsletter. It's called The Insider. There's a lot of great content in there, and a lot of relevant topics on trends in the data analytics ecosystem. I enjoyed this. I don't know if you did, Josh. I think you
I did.
did.
This is great, man.
There you
Yeah, I
go.
love it. Yeah, I hope we get to do this again. Like I said, I'll also advocate. Thank you, everybody, for participating and being here. Once again, I'll say as well, connect with me. I have time. I want to connect with you and just hear what challenges you're running into. So, yeah, I appreciate you, Kevin. This is great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll talk to you later. All right.
Awesome. See you guys. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye.